I'm Jason Lupoy, editor-in-chief of Terpenes and Testing Magazine and Extraction Magazine. And before we begin with Frenchie's keynote presentation this morning, I just wanted to say a few words. I've got a lot to say, so I'm going to dive in. But I wanted to point out that I've themed my opening comments over these next 2 days to kind of talk about how we educate in the cannabis industry, how we educate not only each other, but how we educate new people into the cannabis industry. So, before I do begin, I wanted to thank several people that are either integral to my life or were very integral in putting on this conference. I'm not going to read through everybody, but I just wanted to specifically pay gratitude to our sponsors, Vitalis, Convectium, Sasquatch, Rosin Press, ACS Testing Labs, Bogart, Apex Supercritical, and CMW Media. Thank you all, and thank all of you for being here this morning. I wanted to show you this bathroom. I like to start with this slide because it's kind of, I feel like it really puts things into perspective. This is a bathroom that is probably 15 or 20 minutes from where I live outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And you may have heard likely that the Appalachian region, Ohio, West Virginia, Western Pennsylvania, and a lot of states in New England have a big opioid problem. And this convenience store, they chose to make the lighting in their bathroom blue, specifically so that heroin addicts couldn't find their veins and overdose in the bathroom. So it's a very real problem in these areas, and I think that how this is relevant to cannabis is that Pennsylvania was the first state to allow opioid addicts to get a medical card to be able to treat their addictions. But it's not just people that are, on opioids that are coming to cannabis and that are depending on all of us to be creating safe and ethically produced products. There's people that are dosing their children. There's veterans, and I specifically wanted to bring your attention to an entity called Mission Zero. Mission Zero was started by a veteran named Jose Balin, and one of the things that I heard him present in Pittsburgh, and one of the things that he said was that about 2,000 veterans commit suicide every year. And I think that's a really shocking statistic, and he's highly promoting cannabis for things like PTSD and anxiety, and just helping veterans forget some of the things that they've had to endure. There's also people that are not maybe addicted to medications, but just on a litany of medications that are trying to reduce their consumption of pharmaceuticals. And I think that this is something that I've seen in my own personal life where loved ones have been able to get off of medications for chronic pain or anxiety by using cannabis. And so this is why I do all this, because I've seen my own loved ones benefit from cannabis. And so I really feel that this is a global thing. It's not a Californian thing. It's not a Colorado thing. This is becoming much more of a global discussion. And I think that we need to focus on that. I also think that many times we're sparking the wrong fire. So this is a newspaper ad from, I think, like 1926 or something. I can't read it up at the top, but about Mary Jane laugh addicts. This was before the days of reefer madness, and we still continue to see headlines, maybe not as comical as that, but we still continue to see headlines like this in the industry. And I'm not going to read through all of these. You could see these, you could read these articles for yourself. But two I wanted to point out was the one from The Stranger. Every Washington pot smoker should be worried about California's weed recall. This was in reference to a lot of samples failing for pesticide contamination. And the reason why this writer was saying that people in Washington should be worried is because Washington State does not require pesticide and heavy metal analyses at this moment for recreational cannabis. And so that's a very real concern. And then, of course, you can see the last line. I thought we were kind of beyond this sort of dry labbing, people just selling data without actually measuring the samples. And there was a lab that was caught in California just last December falsifying results. And so these kinds of statements, these kinds of headlines feed the wrong fire. They're going to feed the modern day anslingers that are against this industry. I also wanted to show you this block of cheese. And in a moment of dyslexia, I put half glass full instead of glass half full, which I noticed this morning. But nonetheless, we'll forge ahead. So when you look at this block of cheese, what do you see? Are you optimistic that you could cut around that mold, maybe salvage that? Or are you just tossing it right in the garbage? But what if I told you I could make you a really kick-ass grilled cheese with all that gooey cheese coming out of there, and that bread in the background, I baked that, and the butter is infused. But I still used that moldy cheese to make that sandwich. But the heating process, my frying the sandwich, killed all of the microorganisms. Are you hungry? Does that make you want to eat that? And so I think that, when I used to live in Colorado, I would hear a lot of statements about people just, oh, that cannabis has mold on it or powdery mildew, just send it to the extraction side. And I heard people say things like, well, the extraction process will blast off all of the microorganisms. And that may very well be the case. But the problem with that is, we are calling these products medicine, and usually medicine doesn't start with, well, there are medicines that are derived from molds, but that's not what we're talking about here. But I think that, these microorganisms can be producing mycotoxins, which can then be in the product. And so this, again, doesn't benefit anybody. And if you happen to see Kyle Boyer or Kim Ross running around the conference over the next couple days, they are mycotoxin and microbiology experts, and you can certainly chat with them about any questions you may have. My colleague George put this slide together, and this kind of shows you another problem in the cannabis industry, is that no one's really on the same page from an analytical testing perspective. And you see all of these different, well, hopefully it's kind of small, but you see all of these different states, all of these different regulatory bodies that are, kind of overseeing the industry and a variety of different certification requirements. And so as a scientist, I think this is just the rec markets, and there's perhaps 10 or so states on there. It's 10 different experiments, right? Maybe we can hone in on one that truly works. But I think the other challenge is when you look at the lower boxes, you see all these different thresholds that states have put into place for things like residual solvents or pesticides. And the one thing that it really boggles my mind, and I don't really know why these thresholds were set like this. Perhaps people in the audience do. But when I looked at toluene, for example, Alaska only allows 1 part per million, but California allows 890 parts per million. And that's an 890-fold difference. It's just kind of startling to see all of these differences in the industry. And I think that we truly need to get to standardized numbers here. One of the things that I've kind of, in my roles at Terpenes and Testing and Extraction magazine, I'm always diving into other websites that talk about cannabis. And one of the things that I've noticed that's really perplexing and really confusing, I think, for a lot of people is that there's just a systematic lack of scientific references. And I wanted to bring a case in point here. There's a lot of discussion on the terpene myrcene allowing cannabinoids to cross the blood-brain barrier, okay? You see this ubiquitously across these different websites. There's one example there. If you just, kind of comb through a few websites, just Google myrcene and blood-brain barrier, you'll see all of these sort of secondary media sources talking about this, but there's actually no scientific evidence of this. We've searched for it. And, I've searched for it, my assistant searched for it, one of our advisory board members, Stephen Bennett, has searched for it. We can't find the reference anywhere. Some people have, cited a reference, and of course everybody wants to cite Ethan Russo's Taming THC paper, but this is my actual search here, and if you look in the top right, I'm searching for blood-brain barrier, and I removed the hyphen, and I put BBB, and it doesn't exist in there, and yet that citation said this is where they got that information from. So they just kind of slapped that reference in there, and I guess didn't think anybody was gonna research that, but in fact they're not citing, Russo's paper does not talk about this. I also found a book chapter that basically says the same thing that we found, that, the last line there, perusal of claimed references in the popular literature shows a lack of hard data regarding brain transport. So these people found the same conclusion. I found a terpene that actually has been cited as allowing molecules, things like cannabinoids and other drugs to cross the blood-brain barrier, and it's Borneol, but no one's talking about Borneol. We all hear about myrcene and eating ripe mango 45 minutes before you ingest cannabis. But we're witnessing a shift, and I will take any opportunity to quote the great Hunter Thompson. He's saying here that millions of people agree with him that marijuana is a staple of life, okay? Well, you could see, hopefully you could see on the right, there's a survey that was done recently of about 1,700 people, 1,754 to be exact. And there's a lot of, I think we're seeing a shift in the amount of people that are actually for this industry. These guys broke it down by gender. These guys broke it down by race, white, black, and Hispanic. They broke it down by educational level. They broke it down politically, and that's where I don't think I need to tell you that in this list, the Democrats and independents were much more in favor. Republicans were about 50-50. And they also broke it down by religious preference. And again, I don't think there's really any surprises there, but I think we're starting to see higher numbers across the board. When you look at the Americans for Safe Access, they're saying in the right over there, 89% of Americans are for medical cannabis. That's stunning. 9 out of every 10 people are for medical cannabis. Some of the other stats that they've collected, there's 100 million people in the United States suffering from chronic pain issues. And it's interesting because that's the number one reason why people seek out medical cannabis, but yet there's only 2 million medical cannabis patients. And so there's a lot of untapped market there still that a lot of people are suffering, and they're either not able to access medical cannabis, or they just are still stuck in the taboo. And I think that our education can really help quench some of that stigma and taboo around the industry. There's standardized methods being created as we speak. We had the American Herbal Pharmacopoeia for a long time. One of our advisory board members, Jehan Marku, was very instrumental in helping bring this document about. Nowadays, groups like ASTM are bringing about standardized methods for the industry. And if you see Darwin, and I see Darwin, you can talk to Darwin Millard. He's been really spearheading a lot of these ASTM methods. There's also the American Chemical Society is a very, old society. 1876 they were founded, over 157,000 members, and they've had the foresight to allow a cannabis subdivision called the ACS Can Division. And so we've got several people here over the next several days that are with ACS Can. I'm also a member, and right now there's over 250 members. When we reach 500 members, we'll get to the next rung on the ladder, which is divisional status, and then they can start having some lobbying power. So if you're interested in being a part of the frontier of cannabis science, that's what these guys are after. That's what these guys want to showcase. We'll also have a panel, I believe tomorrow, that is specifically regards the award winners of an award for excellence in cannabis science. With this lack of scientific references in the industry, one of the things that we wanted to do was start just collating references on our website. And we've done so. You can see how to get to that. You just go to resources and down one in the drop down to reference library. These are all open access, freely available articles. None of these are copyright protected. And we've probably got about 150 or so there now. We expect to have well over 500 in the next couple weeks because I've been working on a book. And we're going to be releasing, this book is currently in the editing phase. We're going to be releasing this book. And this is specifically around terpenes. And the way this kind of came about in part was that I started getting asked a lot, are those terpenes really medicinal? And that was always kind of surprising to me because of the use of botanicals, not just aromatherapy, but just eating plants in general, eating herbs and putting herbs in food. And so what we've done with this book is really tried to simplify a lot of the scientific literature on a variety of different terpenes that are common to cannabis. I'm going to leave you with this. Carl Sagan's one of my personal heroes because he literally brought astronomic principles into people's living rooms with his show Cosmos, and that's what I want to do with Terpenes and Testing and Extraction magazine. I don't want it to be at such a high level that people that are new to the industry, I want everybody from a Jehan Marku to my grandmother to be able to get something out of this. And so Carl Sagan said the illegality of cannabis is outrageous, an impediment to the full utilization of a drug which helps produce the serenity and insight, sensitivity and fellowship so desperately needed in this increasingly mad and dangerous world. I always kind of get chills when I read that because Carl Sagan said this in 1969. But have you ever witnessed a time more relevant with this statement than this very moment? With that, I want to introduce Frenchy Cannoli, and it's really an honor for me to be able to introduce Frenchy Cannoli. When I read his bio here. So I'm going to read it from here so you could look at all those lovely pictures. All right, so Frenchy is a teacher, consultant, artisan and activist dedicated to the production and appreciation of traditional cannabis concentrates. Frenchy grew up in Nice, France, but left home as soon as he could, inspired by the promise of exotic adventure and by the imported hashish common in late 1960s Europe. He lived nomadically for over 20 years, staying with traditional producers and learning techniques handed down over generations. This took him from Morocco to Mexico to Nepal, Pakistan, and India, where he spent 8 growing seasons living in caves and harvesting cannabis resin with Parvati Valley cultivators. Collaborating with legendary Emerald Triangle growers and experimenting with techniques like aging, Frenchy's since scaled up to producing pure gold, as reported by Cannabis Now, for licensed dispensary distribution, an unmatched hash with a character unlike anything that you would ever smell or taste in cannabis flower, according to one Emerald Cup judge. He's taken an open source approach to promoting traditional methods. His Lost Art of the Hashishin seminars provide hands-on training for aspiring concentrate makers, and Frenchy freely shares the same techniques on YouTube, as well as with his over 114,000 Instagram followers. He's likewise pushed for broader post-legalization public education. Beyond working to develop hashish grading standards, Frenchy is a prominent supporter of regional growing certifications for cannabis production. He's also developing a feature-length documentary that showcases the challenges legalization has brought to small California farms. With that, that's it for me. I welcome Frenchy Cannoli to the stage.
Thank you so much. Make me blush. It's pretty ironic for me to be in a convention like that is so scientifically oriented. When I started to travel when I was 18, I escaped the Western world because it made me feel like smoking hash was the worst things I could do to myself. But it was the most amazing well-beingness and experience I ever had. So since I always wanted to travel, I basically took 18 years solid of retirement up front. And I spent those 18 years traveling in producing country. And at that time, we had no data, we didn't share nothing, there were no science. And everything that I experienced during those 18 years in producing country, when I came to the States, not only I discovered that that plant was actually, that the plant was actually medicinal, but also I had the ability to learn from science what actually I was working with. I'm a craftsman. As a craftsman, there is 2 things in my life: the product I work with and the tool I work with to do whatever I want with that product. And during 18 years traveling in producing country, I got the tool, but I had no idea what was the product I was working with. I was totally ignorant. And it's by learning the science behind that resin head that I could bring my game to the level I am now. So, cannabis concentrate, everything that is produced from those resin head is a cannabis concentrate. From loose resin head to pure cannabinoid isolate. The word concentrate englobes all that together. And I made a chart to put it down by process, technique, the plant material, and the end product. And the whole presentation, we're going to create that chart. Before this, I'd like you to take some perspective on the magic there is between that plant and us. The endocannabinoid system that we have in our body was in the first life on the planet 1 billion years ago. Then, 30 million years ago, the cannabis plant, comment ça s'appelle? Separated from the humulus and become cannabis. And then, 30 million years later, the mammal come with the endocannabinoid system in their body. The relation we have with that plant spans the whole evolution of life on the planet Earth. It's big. So what produces this cannabinoid? It's the trichome, and it looks like a hairy structure on a plant. The plant kingdom produces 200,000 of those organic compounds, mostly to deal with predator and climatic change. The plant produces organic compounds are called secondary metabolites. Those trichomes are not part of the main metabolism of the plant. The plant produces those trichomes around the flower before pollination, mostly to capture as much pollen as possible, and then literally to protect the next generation coming, and to protect the plant from harsh climatic conditions. There is 400,000 plants known on the planet that produce 200,000 organic compounds. There is only one plant that bound the two most common molecules in the plant kingdom, terpene and phenol, which are both toxic, by the way, and produce 150 plus compounds that are non-toxic. The magic happens in those little resin heads. And what's very interesting is the plant was medicinal before she was psychoactive. The CBDA synthase is older than the THCA synthase. That means that most certainly humanity and the migration of the plant brought that new synthase into the plant. One of the most amazing pieces of information I received, learning the science behind the trichome and the transformation and the production of the cannabinoid inside the resin head. A resin head is made like a fruit. There is an abscission under the head that hold it to the stalk. And the riper the resin head become, the smaller that abscission become, and it just fall when it's ripe. When you collect resin the way I collect it, this is the key to be able to define to an amazingly accurate level the dimension of ripeness of the resin head, how much resin has been formed inside that resin head. So, to find the origin of concentrate, we need to find the origin of the cannabis plant. And we have a problem straight up with this because humanity has been migrating and moving around with the plant for so long that we cannot pinpoint the birthplace. Up to recently, there were 3 birthplaces that were considered. The first was China, because some of the oldest archaeological evidence come from there. The second is the Himalayan, the feet of the Himalaya from Bhutan to the Pamir mountain, because that's the oldest cannabis culture, the oldest written text on cannabis are in the Veda, and they're 5,000 years old. And the third place was Central Asia, because of the way plant diffuse from Central Asia, and because it's agriculture was born there. And recently, there were a huge study done on pollen, and they could pinpoint the specific place where cannabis become cannabis and let the ops side of the family go its way. And it's in a Tibetan plateau in the near the Quinkay Lake. Okay? The plant was born there 28 million years ago. So humanity was born in South Africa. And the oldest evidence of humanity on the Euro-Asian continent is 2 million years old. And it's in China, and it's right next to that Qinghai Lake. Okay? The plant was born there, but 6 million years ago it was in Europe. So that the movement from the migration from the plant to Europe is very simple. It's all plain and it's the same climatic condition. It didn't reach China, southern and eastern China before 1.2 million years ago. It took much longer for the plant to go in a much smaller distance than the spread towards Europe. If humanity was all over Europe from Germany to China 1.8 to 2 million years ago, how long would it take our ancestors that were master foragers to find a plant that is so bloody hard to hide today? I don't think very long. And as master forager and a nomadic lifestyle, the most important element of your diet are going to be grain and seeds. It packs the most nutritional element, it's light, and it has a very long shelf life. So most certainly, the first ancestor, possibly as far away as 2 million years ago, when he touched that plant to get the seeds, that first resin on his finger was the first concentrate ever made. We call it charas in India today. So, before I thought the guy is a master forager, humanity went through 200,000 plants to find the 1,000 plant edible, the 100 or so that can be domesticated, and the dozen that are still feeding the planet. Since 13,000 BC, we have not domesticated a new plant or a new animal. Those people had a relation with the plant kingdom that we cannot even dream of it. How long would it take our ancestor to try that resin? So, to the point that there is a good chance that he would try the resin that has collected on his hand before trying the seed or discovering the quality of the fiber of the plant. If the plant had been psychoactive, it's not like a huge stretch of thought to think that the guy would have experienced the psychoactive aspect of the plant before anything. But the plant was medicinal. It's like the ability of those people to connect with the plant and to define every aspect of the plant is like mind-boggling. So, if you collect good stuff on your finger, how much of a stretch it is to take the fan leaf of a plant and start caressing it. Instead of touching just with the tip of your finger, you caress. And slowly, slowly, you put layer of resin on your hand until you have a nice and fat layer of cannabis resin. And then, today, it's still a tech that is practiced in India because it's a tropical country, it's very humid, and now some places may have electricity, but you need to be able to dry sieve or to do any other tech, you need the climatic condition to do it. The tricky part when you stick resin in your hand, it's to take it off. But on your hand, you're going to always have a thicker layer of resin. You just have to snap it out, and then you clean your hand like that. And you see that on the right down, the guy has one hand all clean, and a piece of ash on his thumb, and the other hand all full. He just cleans that first hand. The one just after him, he finishes a hand, he transfers the resin on his other finger to snap his other hand clean. And once you snap it, charas look like that. It has a very special texture. It's live resin. There is nothing like charas grown in the mountain of the Himalaya, like the wild cannabis from the mountain of the Himalayas that has been growing there most certainly for 370,000 years, according to research, is unique and very special. The look, the experience, the taste, everything is quite magical. When it's clean, it looks like that. And then this starts to be like some high quality. And in the spatty, you can see the little dry part of material in it. If you edge this well, it will disappear. The resin is going to absorb anything that is not resin or terpene. And this is Malana cream, an amazing valley in a mountain with amazing people, and the genetic of the valley is not so special, but their ability to make really high-end charas is beyond. So, when you're a master forager and you've been collecting seeds and grain for a long time, there is one thing that you have to do, it's to dry the plant to be able to collect the seeds. And 2 million years ago, it must have been pretty wild. You wouldn't collect a plant that must have been pretty big, since it was the megaflora and the megafauna. You would cut the plant, bring it to the camp, to dry it, to collect the seeds. And now, how could our ancestor stretch from live resin to dry resin? When you break away a flower to collect the seeds, you're going to have resin sticking on your finger, even if it's dry. And at the same time, you have like that cloud of resin head falling down every time you touch. And since the dawn of time, we have used that type of basketry to separate chaff from grain. So the stretch of imagination to go from live to dry resin and understanding that it's the same product, it's not too difficult. But to create dry sieving, to make hashish, you need more than a nomadic life. You cannot work only with wild cannabis that grow all over the place. You need agriculture. You need agriculture, and you need the tool. You need the sieve to do that separation. The green are the three potential places of birth of cannabis, and that the white spot is the specific place where cannabis was born. The red line is the Silk Road. It's the oldest trade route on the Euro-Asian continent. The first evidence of long trading is 130,000 years old. It started in China, where the plant was born, and it finished on the shore of the Mediterranean Sea, in Lebanon, the oldest ash culture on the continent, and all the way, it's only ash culture. Like that movement of cannabis from its birthplace toward all Central Asia and Europe has been breeding for psychoactive potential. The movement to China, they were breeding to make fiber and seeds and the plant producing as little cannabinoid as possible. The tool, cotton was born in Pakistan 7,000 years ago, and silk 6,000 years ago in China, and there is fiber impression in clay of really finely woven fiber that is basically older than agriculture. So by the time agriculture was born, they had not only the tool, but the ability to dry and store cannabis so that it could be sieved. And this is how hashish look. The texture of it, it's totally different. The whole experience, psychoactive and medicinal, it's totally different. When you dry a plant and you cure a plant, you lose 80% of your terpene. But the terpenes that remain, they're polymer bound together and they create new terpene profile. So the quality of the terpene profile, while the terpenes are everything because they give you the ability to absorb more cannabinoid and they modulate the experience because they, with the binding on a receptor, it's not the amount of terpene that is on the terpenes profile that makes the quality of the terpene profile. It's the uniqueness of it. So you cannot say what is the best. It's just two different products. Live resin and dry sieved resin, it's charas and hashish. It's been on earth for thousands and thousands of years. It's just two different products that you cannot compare because they're different and they both have values that are unique to each of them. That's Moroccan hashish. That's some Afghan. And that's the good Afghan with a little bit of a gold stamp on it. And when you work with charas, live resin that you stick on your hand, or when you work with dry sieved material, the only element that truly define quality is the cleanliness of your resin. And on the chart, it would look like that. The process, the first one is manual rubbing. You work only with live plant. The technique is hand rubbing, and the hand product is charas. The first evolution in the methodology that created a new concentrate is dry sieving. Dry sieving, in a good old day, you would work only with dry sieve, with dry material. Now today, if you flash freeze your material and you sieve in a cold chamber, you can actually dry sieve live resin, which is pretty amazing. Then water come. Water changed everything. Water is the first evolution on a game that is as old as agriculture. When you use water, you rehydrate your material. That means that you work with a material that is not brittle anymore. You do not create contaminant. But further than that, when you dry sieve, you have your tool, the material that you want to sieve over it, and you agitate so that the resin head are going to detach from their stock, fall on the sieve, and pass through the perforation of the tool. So you have agitation and separation together in one methodology that you cannot separate. When I use water, I can. I have a chamber where I agitate with the water, and I have my bag where I separate, they're my tool. it brings the game to a level where I cannot make contaminant if I don't make a mistake. And I can work with live resin, but I cannot work with live resin during the day. Live resin during the day, you want it hot, you want it sticky, because you stick it on your hand. With my machine, I need it cold. I don't want the resin to stick anywhere. So I work at night, because it's cold, and I work at night also because if you harvest your plant at night, they don't exude any terpene. The terpene, it's daytime story. So you can capture the maximum content of terpene when you harvest your plant at night. But when you do that, there is limitation. The first one is when you cut a plant with so much chlorophyll in her body, in a network of very much like the vein we have in our body, when you cut that plant, it bleeds. When you put it in water, it's going to come in the water with your resin. You can clean it every time, but it's a lot of work. When you freeze your material, there is a problem because the plant is made of 80% of water. When that water becomes ice, it becomes 10% bigger. That means that you literally explode from the inside out at the cellular level your plant. But at the same time, you cauterize that cut. That means that there is no bleeding. If you work fast, you can collect all the resin head before it starts melting inside. So it's an amazing tool, and it gives me the ability to have a lot more, a much bigger reach and ability to produce live resin all year long, and with a lot of different strains. And I also work with dry and cured material. The end product, it's still hashish. I cannot call it traditional hashish because I had a custom-made washer and bags to do it. I use a freeze dryer to dry my resin, but at the end of the day, a resin head is a resin head that I collect it with a dry sieve or using water. It's still a loose resin head that when I press it becomes hashish through a transformation that happens into that mass of resin. So I call it ice water hashish so that there is a difference and people are not too much on my case for using the word traditional like I do. And it brings that new category into the chart. It's still sieving. I have more materials that I can use. The end product, it's still the same. It's loose resin head that I press into a mass of resin. When I do that, when I press my resin head into a mass, I crush the matrix that created the 150 plus cannabinoid and terpene inside my mass of resin. It's very much like wine. If you take the juice from the grape, you make alcohol. You extract the juice from the grape to make alcohol. When you crush the grape to make wine, I need the skin, I need the seeds. Otherwise, there is no fermentation, there is no transformation. And wine in an alcohol beverage, it's its own entity. There is nothing that can compare to wine. It is its own. Everything else is alcohol. Well, hashish is very much the same. When you go into the extraction, you take the resin from the resin head. You take the juice from the fruit. It's still the fruit, but everything that created that juice and that sugar, you leave it behind. So that whole element of it, it's not part of the product that you're producing, but you enter into territory where there is almost no limit to the diversity that can be created. So that's the new non-solvent extraction process. You can work with live resin, with fresh frozen, and with dry resin. The process of separation is through heat and pressure. The main product created is rosin, and then from rosin you can go further. That's ash rosin. You can go further and create different texture of it, like the butter, or literally create pure THCA by separating the terpene and most of the cannabinoid and leaving the THCA on the side. And this is only heat and pressure. It's pretty trippy. Huh? And you can literally separate the terp and the cannabinoid, put them back together, and make diamond grow inside the juice of terpene. Yeah. In a non-solvent extraction, I have to add CO2 and liquid nitrogen. They are not solvent, but they act like solvent. CO2, everything that is done in CO2, it mostly goes into cartridge and pen. But you could create distillate and isolate with it and a lot of different products, but it's rarely done. And liquid nitrogen, you make a kind of ash. I'm not really too fan of it, to tell you the truth. And then we come into the solvent extraction. And the solvent extraction is what created the market here in America. You don't have the ash culture that we have in Europe. You smoked ash in the 70s because the Brotherhood of Eternal Love went to Afghanistan and brought a lot to you. And then they cracked down in the 70s. You started you grow your flower, and that was it. Then BHO came. And BHO brought back the concentrate into the awareness of a smoker here in America. So, solvent extraction, butane and propane rule. You can work with fresh frozen and dry material. And the amount of products that are made is pretty limitless. The name of the product is mostly defines the main characteristic and look of the product. We do not have really a common vocabulary, and we definitely need it really, really bad. And I have to add also in a solvent extraction ethanol, because a lot of really good medicine is made from ethanol. They work with whole plant, and they capture much more than cannabinoid and terp. There is over 450 compounds in a plant, and most of them we don't really know how good they could be for us. So I have to mention it. And Rick oil, because while it's very controversial, it is a medicine too. It all depends the use of the type of alcohol you use to do your extraction. And now that we talked a lot about the resin, when I was traveling around the world, nobody really cared very much about me making the ash. I have made ash all my life. It's not a big deal. It's my life. And the value of the ash that I had, it's where did I go to make that ash? When you go to India and you stay in the Kulu Valley and you make your charas at 800 feet, well, it's not quite the same that when you go at the end of the Parvati at 7,000 or Malana at 8,000 feet and you work with wild cannabis or fields that you let go back to wildness. It's where you go. It's the origin of the plant that makes the quality. When I travel, it was the land, the climate, and the land race. When I came to California, it was the land, the climate, the genetic, but behind the genetic, there is a breeder. And then there is actually a farmer behind the plant. And I'm like a winemaker. The quality of what I do is defined by my farmer. I'm nobody without my farmer. And none of you working in extracting has any value if we don't grow that plant. And that plant is a trinity. It's medicine, and we've known it for at least 8,000 years. It's psychoactive, and it's been used on the planet for 5,000 to 7,000 years that we know of. But before anything, it's the only natural resource that can save that planet. It's the only plant that can clean the planet the way it does. That's the only plant that can help us not cutting forest, not using petroleum, stopping to make plastic bag. It's like you want to make money in that green rush, that green industry. Yeah, well, if you don't care about how you do it, you're not going to have the time to spend that money. We don't have a future. We don't even have 20 years in front of us if we keep doing the way we do. It's like all the bloody packaging we use. There is nothing made from cannabis. They're growing CBD in Colorado. They let the stock rot in a field. It's like CBD, it's a byproduct of the fiber and the seeds that plant can produce. It's like shame on us if we don't use that plant the way it should be used. Because Jack Herer, 25 years ago, gave a challenge to the world. He asked anybody to prove him wrong, and he would put $100,000 on the table. After 25 years, nobody has proven him wrong. But the thing is, now we have to prove him right, because we don't have a choice, and we don't have any future without that plant. Thank you very much. I don't know the timing.
All right. So we've got some time for some questions for Frenchie. If anybody has questions, we've got about 5 minutes.
Thank you very much for very interesting report, presentation. Just a very short question about because today the main topic of our conference is the concentration, isolation of cannabinoids. And my question is, you mentioned about the very low stability of cannabinoids during drying. This is the result, what's the chemical origin of this instability? It's effect of concentration or effect of destroying on the base of the effect of temperature?
You mean about the plant itself?
Oh. We created the concentrate. And in comparison with the initial material, we lost, you mentioned about the 80%. I'm asking, we concentrated, it's one effect. And we use the temperature.
It's like what I do, making ash, I'm still working with the entourage effect of the plant. I'm still connected fully with the plant. When you extract, you leave the plant behind you, but you go into new territory to the point that you can literally isolate cannabinoid. You could create a pharmacopoeia of cannabinoid and terpene produced by the plant and use it according to symptom. But at the same time, as much as you can do that, what the plant, the terpenes that the plant produce are common in the plant kingdom, but the terpene profile of the plant is unique to the plant. There is 100 plus terpene in any profile of the plant, and a lot of them, you can't quantify them. That means that what the plant gives us as a therapeutic medicine and as a psychoactive medicine, you cannot duplicate it. But you can use that magic and go into the Western medicine world. It's like we can do today what the big pharma were telling us it was impossible 50 years ago. They've spent billions and billions of dollars trying to make cannabinoid. At the end of the day, yeah, you can grow it on yeast, but that first cannabinoid, the CBGA, well, guess what? The plant needs to give it to you for you to go further. So it's like, it's just going into the 21st century and the ability to manipulate the bounty of that plant to a level that it's Western medicine. But that therapeutic part of the plant, that the big pharma will never be able to compete with the plant, basically.
Thank you very much.
Other questions?
Good morning, sir, and thank you for that wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I'm Gordon Long from Colorado Wellness Botanicals. And my question is, you mentioned briefly that there's a lack of rigorous science surrounding this plant and the artistry that you described. How can chemical engineers help solve this problem and give you better science?
I picked it up online. I read a lot of scientific papers, and a lot of them were done by the American government against the plant. But science is science. You get data. And from those data, for example, when I learned that the resin head was made like a fruit, it changed my world. I was working with something I couldn't see. And you cannot define the ripeness of the resin head by the color or by the size, because there is too much diversity in a plant. So I needed a way to be able to define ripeness, to define the melt, how much resin is formed inside that resin head. If the resin head is made like a fruit, well, I'm looking at a fruit tree. So, or I go to the fruit tree and touch the fruit and smell them to know the ripest, or there is a very simple way. I shake the tree just a tiny bit, and I have my ripest fruit falling down, and then a tiny bit stronger, and a tiny bit stronger, and I shake in my machine my material 12, 13 times. And every one of those shakes, it's a dimension of ripeness that the whole plant was giving me because of that abscission. Man, now I can tell you to the day how early or how late you are harvested because of that ability to define so accurately how much resin is formed inside the resin head without the ability to see inside that resin head.
Thank you.
So I think we've got time for one more question, and this gentleman's had his hand raised for a while.
Hi there. What's your opinion on live resin and those real rich monoterpenes and what those thermally degrade into when people are putting those on a nail and all that?
Well, so phenol is toxic. Phenol is half of a cannabinoid. It's toxic, you can get sick. And the whole vegetable that you eat, 70-80% of it is phenol. But you can get sick on it. Terpene is toxic to the point that you can kill somebody. It's like terpenes are a very seriously powerful compound. If I lock you in a room, I can make you go through every feeling I want just pulling terpene in that room. I can make you cry, I can make you laugh, I can make you do whatever I want. And I can make you so sick that you die from it. So only the cannabis plant has the ability to pick up two toxic compounds and create non-toxic compound. But then when you separate them again, well, you go into how powerful terpene is, and you need to educate yourself if you play around with terpene. because it's aromatherapy. It's the first medicine we ever used. It's a very, very, very powerful. So it's absolutely incredible what can be done with, but no, yeah, you don't dab terpene because you can really hurt yourself, especially if you're a medical patient. But it's beautiful what you're doing, huh, guys. Don't get me wrong. Huh? It's just that you need to educate yourself and you need to educate your people so that they're careful, that they're really working with powerful compound and they can use them in a very good way if they know what is good for them. So that's the type of terpenes they would go for and you give them the ability to actually choose, which is pretty badass.
All right, so I think we're out of time. If you have more questions for Frenchie, we're going to be in a panel discussion at 10:15 right next door. Just a couple other things I wanted to let you guys know to update your schedules. Hang on. At 11:45 in this room today, there is a change in the schedule, and so Tristan Watkins will be presenting formulations for mainstream consumers. And then also tomorrow, and I'll remind you about this again tomorrow, but at 2:15 there's a change, and so there's a presentation called Extracting the Regulations for Manufacturers, which will be moved into this room as well. So remind you about that again tomorrow. Again, thank you all, and again, please thank Frenchie Cannoli.